Tammy, let me get you set up here. Boom.
I've got it.
You got it. Okay, I got it.
I want to go back in history a little bit, so, and I'm going to have a mic because I wave my arm, so.
There you go. Does that work? Tammy, you good here?
I'm good. Hi, everybody. Too loud? Hope not. Okay, talking about winning the media war. I'm going to go back a little farther in history. I want to make 5 points. First of all, let's talk about the definition of war, who or what are we fighting, and the history of the opponent, how an army or nation should act when they're at war, what are the weapons we use, and a call to arms. A war is a state of armed conflict between states or nations, or between groups within a state or nation. I would submit that there is an ongoing war between those who espouse the founders' worldview and revere the Constitution, and those who oppose the founders' precepts and would prefer to throw off the Constitution and its constraints. This has been happening actively since the times of President Wilson and John Dewey. So if people say it just started in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, they're not looking at the whole picture. It started in the early 20th century. We need to be aware of this. The progressive movement began with education, moved into broadcast media, and elsewhere in our culture. And let's not be fooled by some of their words they use, such as progressive. Progressive sounds innocuous. It was just a more palatable term for communist. They also say forward a lot. You notice this? That sounds like no big deal, but what are they moving forward from, and what do they want to move forward to? Let's consider John Dewey. John Dewey is known as the father of education. He's supposed to be so fantastic. It's interesting that she mentioned Hegel's dialectic, because John Dewey fashioned everything he believed in education from the Hegelians. Now, if that rings a bell, think of 1847, the London Communist Society, aka Marx and Engels. Their dialectic backed up their economic theory of communism. Hegel's dialectic was the framework for guiding thoughts and conflicts to lead us to a predetermined solution, the solution being an authoritarian government or communism. Well, Dewey subscribed to both naturalist thought, think Charles Darwin, and to Hegel's dialectic. By the way, Common Core is the culmination of Dewey's dream. Common Core doesn't teach critical thinking. Common Core doesn't teach phonics. What it does teach is control and group think. And a side note, since we're in a school here, dialectic is not always bad. So when we hear it, we don't always want to cringe. Think about classical Western education. It's based on something called the trivium, from the Latin, tri meaning 3, via meaning road. The concept being that children had 3 stages of learning, and this has been lost in Common Core, by the way. The first stage is the grammar stage. Think grammar school, that's where we got that from. In this stage, the young student has a natural affinity for storing up mass amounts of information. It can be about nursery rhymes, math, even Latin declensions. Most classicists believe that in this stage, kids should learn by memorization. That's the old way they did it. Think of how we learned the alphabet. The second stage is, believe it or not, the dialectic stage. And this is when the older student hones their abilities to reason, and everything is turned into an exercise of argumentation. The third stage is rhetoric, and this is the final stage where it's all applied. The problem with Dewey is his idea was not to cultivate learned and critical thinkers, but rather students that would parrot the enlightened educators. All of this, once again, coming to fruition under Common Core. Now, President Wilson, the second person in this dynamic duo of socialism, he's often called the godfather of modern liberalism, which, once again, progressivism, aka Marxism, communism, what have you. It just sounds more palatable as progressivism. Wilson helped sow the first wave of progressive reforms that came to fruition under FDR. Wilson believed that both the Declaration and the Constitution needed to be understood through a new lens of progressivism. What did Wilson say about the Declaration of Independence? Listen to this. The rhetorical introduction of the Declaration of Independence is the least part of it. If you want to understand the real Declaration of Independence, do not repeat the preface. So, all of you that know the Declaration, what is the preface? Here's the section that Wilson found most objectionable. You all will recognize this. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers, their just powers, from the consent of the governed. This is the problem. Woodrow Wilson had an objection to the separation of powers and an objection to the founders' understanding of government. I'm going back there because I want you to know what's going on now. Wilson did not favor separation of powers. He favored a separation of politics and administration. And this is where it gets really interesting. Wilson favored moving government away from popular consent and forward to the hands of unelected experts. The presidency of Wilson was a principal means by which the limits placed on government by separation of powers and the constraint of the Constitution could be transcended. Interesting. What does that sound like? Who can you think of that is appointing a new czar at every turn? And who says the word forward every time we turn around? Anyone? Absolutely. Obama does. Now, concerning those progressives at the first part of the 20th century, even Hillary Clinton made a point of saying that she didn't want to be called a liberal. She would prefer to be connected to the progressives of the early 20th century, aka Wilson and Dewey. And we also have to understand, here's another critical point that to add to this whole conundrum. If government was not a necessary evil for the provision of national defense and basic infrastructure, but rather, in the eyes of Dewey and Wilson, intrinsically good, a means by which enlightened individuals would guide and mold society, and because of this, a key amendment to eradicate would be what? Anyone? What amendment is the teeth of the Constitution? Second? I would say the second is the teeth. The first is important, but the second is really big. And remember, during the time of the constitutional debate, there were dissenters that said we did not need a right to bear arms. That was unnecessary. Surely our servant leaders, surely Congress would never try to strip the populace of the right to bear arms. Well, they had just severed ties with the tyranny of King George, and every colonist, every patriot knew the importance of an armed populace. Thankfully, the Bill of Rights was drafted by Madison, and we have the Second Amendment. The nation's leading authority of and litigator on behalf of the Second Amendment is an acquaintance of mine, Stephen P. Halbrook, and he told me last week there are dozens of cases right now, maybe scores, nationwide, under the Second Amendment to various gun laws. There are also hundreds of criminal cases nationwide that are challenging the non-criminal American citizen right to bear arms. It's really important to keep this all in mind because it all comes under the idea of the progressive. They want more control, they want less consent, and to have more control, they need to do away with our arms. So, who are we battling against? It's not just media, it's not just others. We're battling against those progressives who seek to limit the scope and the authority of the Constitution. What does a country or a people look like when they're at war? Let's think of World War II. I don't know, were any of you here in World War II? Your father was. I had 2 great uncles that served in World War II, and I'm very proud of that. What did America do during World War II? Americans knew, first of all, they knew who their enemy was. Nazi Germany, Axis powers, Imperial Japan, correct? As a united nation, Americans everywhere joined the war effort. The Office of Price Administration was established to ration supplies. What happened? Because we had limited milk, eggs, etc., women all over this nation learned to make do. Things like wacky cake became all the rage. Because there was a food shortage, the Department of Agriculture said, y'all need to grow vegetables. Consequently, they dubbed them victory gardens. At its peak in 1944, 20 million victory gardens produced 8 million pounds of food. This is what a nation united can do, folks. We also had women getting involved in the war because 10 million men were at war. What were we going to do? We were going to fill the workplace with women. We all know the image of the gal in overalls with a wrench, Rosie the Riveter. She became the beloved icon of the 40s. Then women got into the military itself. In May of 42, Congress created the WAAFs, Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. In September 42, they created an agency I hadn't heard of, the WAAFs, which is the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. The Fly Girls delivered fighters, bombers, transport planes to bases all over. And during World War II, believe it or not, over 350,000 women donned uniforms. Coming up to the end, so I've got to make my points quickly. Another phenomenon of World War II was that we had the backing of Hollywood, obviously pre-Michael Moore. Legendary filmmakers, and listen to this, John Ford, Frank Capra, William Wyler, John Huston, and George Stevens all joined the cause. What do troops do at war? I'm going to say this quickly, and I'm going to borrow from the Marines. You're welcome, Freddie Blish. Recruits must have the heart, the intestinal fortitude, the body, the mind, the desire, and the ability. The recruits must pull together or fall apart, win as one, or all will fail. Commitment doesn't take breaks. It cannot be faked. When other principles are tested, it's courage that prevents them from crumbling. Courage is not ignoring fear, but being stronger than fear. Courage is the guardian of all values. It is there when times are toughest, when difficult decisions have to be made. It takes the form of mental, physical, and ethical strength. What are the weapons we can use? We've got social media. We've got to use social media. We don't have Hollywood and mainstream media cheering us on, but opposing us. I have friends all over the nation now who use Twitter. A lot of you are not going to run out and get an account. If you want to, I've got tutorials. I will help. But we've got to use new media. I want to give you a quick story to tell you why new media can work. 4 years ago, I wanted to send out a thank you to the vets and troops. I edited a video with Zell Miller quoting the poem, "It is the Soldier." I added it to tweets. I had 15,000 followers on Twitter at the time. 3,000 were military. I added their Twitter names on these tweets. I had over 100 tweets. I scheduled them to go out every 5 minutes starting early in the morning. I asked all 15,000 of my followers to please retweet these tweets. They did so. On that day, hundreds of thousands of veterans saw my thank you and all my friends saying thank you for your service, and Zell Miller quoting that poem. And I'm just one little gal in Oregon. This is what social media can do. It amplifies our reach. One other thing that new media does, we go to the airport and we hear CNN, we channel surf, and we see broadcast media, and it's all biased to the left. We get on social media, you start getting messages, tweets, retweets from patriots and kindred spirits across the nation. Suddenly we're not alone, and hope is renewed. So the one thing, as I'm coming to the end here, wrapping up, is Shane's saying, come on, Tammy. The 5 points. Remember, a war is a state of armed conflict between nations or states, or between groups within a nation or states. We are at war with those that seek to limit the scope and authority of the Constitution. In a time of war, number 3, allies band together and fight cohesively and courageously. In this time of war, we have the power of new media to amplify our reach, to do an end run around mainstream media, which is hopelessly saturated with progressives. I want to call all of you to do something, to reach someone. What I'd like to say is, my dad always told me, Tammy, I never want to hear about you starting a fight. He also said it to my brothers, but I was a tomboy, so he had to warn me. I never want to hear about you starting a fight, but if a bully refuses to leave you alone, picks on you, and is starting a fight, you better end it. The U.S. patriots who love America and our Constitution, we're the people being picked on. Let's face it. The bullies are the progressives, the Marxists, who would prefer to remake the Constitution or toss it entirely. We flyover folks have been really, really busy doing the right thing. We've been raising families, paying too much in taxes, serving our country, and working hard so we don't live off the government dole. But I would say to you, the progressives started this fight. Now it's our turn to get riled up and finish it.